The day I nearly died in Spanish class wasn't because of my diabetes. It was because my teacher cared more about her evaluation than my life. I was sitting in Spanish class when I realized I'd made a huge mistake. I had skipped breakfast. Out of nowhere, my glucose monitor began beeping. "I need to go see the nurse," I said, my voice shaky as dizziness hit me. The student teacher frowned. "The state inspector is here. No one leaves until he's gone." "You don't understand. I'm diabetic," I tried again. "Be patient. It's only 20 minutes away." But my vision was already fading. I pushed myself up, heading for the door, when I heard the sound, beep. My student badge had just been disabled. "I'm not letting some teenager with a victim complex ruin my evaluation score," she snapped. My monitor screamed louder. She stormed over and ripped it right off my arm. "That's enough. No more disruptions," she yelled. "That's for her blood sugar levels," someone shouted. "I said, sit down," Miss Winter barked. That's when I noticed a shadow at the door. The security guard. He saw my face through the window, reached for the handle. Thank God. "Don't even try," Miss Winter's voice cut like glass. "We're under state review. You open that door, you're fired." He hesitated, looked at me, looked at her, then walked away. Pain ripped through me. 15 minutes left before coma or worse. Half the class raised their phones toward the ceiling, desperate for a signal. We were on the 4th floor. Dead zone. "Of course. Put those phones away right now," Miss Winter screamed. "You think I'm stupid, recording this little performance?" She spun on me. "Empty your pockets. Show everyone your props." Candy wrappers spilled out. She kicked them across the room. "See? Always eating candy. Always pretending you need sugar." It felt like fire ants under my skin. She grabbed my glucose meter from my backpack. "Test yourself. Prove this emergency," she demanded. My fingers trembled so bad I couldn't even hold the strips. They scattered like confetti. "You can't even fake it right," she sneered. My skull felt like it was splitting apart. Then Jake dug through his backpack. I caught a glimpse of a Nature Valley wrapper. He slid it toward me, but crinkle. Miss Winter's head snapped around. "What was that?" We froze. She snatched it up. "A snack? During inspection?" She crushed it in her fist, crumbs raining into the trash. "No food. Rules are rules." My stomach nodded. 7 minutes left. That's when Trevor, the school bully, stood. "My dad's diabetic. She needs sugar now." "Suspension, immediately," she snapped back. Before he could argue, the teacher's pet chimed in. "She always does this during tests. Remember last semester?" "You're crazy, Ashley. Look at her lips. They're blue." 6 minutes left. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out. Agony ripped through me. Half the class was still too scared to move. So I started crawling, dragging myself toward the door. When I just grabbed my 3rd desk pole, when Miss Winter stomped on my hand. "No one leaves before 3 p.m. No exceptions." "Someone help her," Sarah cried. "Anyone moves, you get a 0 for the quarter," Miss Winter threatened. 3 minutes left. Trevor swiped his badge at the door. Access denied. Other kids joined him, begging. My tongue swelled, blocking my throat. Miss Winter crouched right in my face. "You know what happened last year when your mom tried to get me fired. I learned what kind of family you are." 1 minute left. My heart hammered so hard I thought my ribs would snap. She leaned so close I could see her nose hairs. "Pathetic. Your whole family. Pathetic liars." Something in me snapped. My head slammed into hers. She screamed, blood everywhere. Her lanyard swung loose. I grabbed it with shaking hands, dragging myself to the door. Every inch was torture. Access granted. The lock clicked. Trevor yanked it open. "Nurse! Somebody get the nurse! Call 911!" Voices shouted. Miss Winter was still yelling. "She's faking! They're being dramatic! Sabotage!" The paramedic said my blood sugar hit 19. I was technically brain dead for 2 minutes. Miss Winter was put on temporary leave. But to me, that wasn't nearly enough. She had almost killed me, and I wasn't about to let that go.
The ambulance ride felt like fragments, needles piercing my skin, monitors screaming, and someone calling out numbers that seemed to drop lower each second. By the time we reached the ER, I was being rushed down hallways, nurses sticking fresh sensors and wires across my chest and arms. The IV stung when it slid in, though not as much as the pounding in my skull from hitting Ms. Winter. A doctor with exhausted eyes explained calmly that after what my body had just been through, I'd need to wear a continuous glucose monitor for at least 6 months. My mom gripped my hand so hard her nails left marks while he said the words, "lucky to be alive." My thoughts were muddy and slow, but the fury burning inside me was sharp as glass. A nurse came over, snapping pictures of the swelling bruise across my hand where Miss Winter had stepped on it. She cataloged the shattered remains of my glucose meter from my backpack and printed out a full record of my blood sugar levels from the last 12 hours. She muttered something under her breath about criminal negligence as she shook her head. Then a social worker arrived, clipboard in hand, asking if I wanted to make a report with Child Protective Services. Before she even finished her sentence, I grabbed the pen and signed every single paper she placed in front of me. That same evening, while I was still strapped to 3 machines, the principal called my mom's phone. She put him on speaker. His voice was stiff and careful, every word polished like he was reading from a script, talking about unfortunate incidents and reviewing protocols, but never once offering an apology. He repeated liability insurance and district policy like a shield. It was obvious he was worried about lawsuits, not the fact that I'd nearly died. Once the nurses decided I was stable enough, I finally got my phone back. The class group chat was exploding. Hundreds of messages. People saying they couldn't believe what happened, how terrified they were, and how someone should have stepped in earlier. Lucia sent a 3-minute voice note, crying so hard I could barely catch her, saying she'd tried to help, but was too scared of suspension. Jake texted that he felt awful about the granola bar and wished he'd thrown it harder. Sarah forwarded screenshots showing that the whole situation was already plastered all over Instagram. While Mom handled discharge papers with the doctors, I opened my voice recorder. I whispered every detail I could still remember before it faded. Miss Winter's words about my family being pathetic manipulators, the long seconds she let pass while refusing help, the exact look on the security guard's face when he walked away, leaving me to collapse. I saved the file 3 times and emailed it to myself twice, just in case. Later that night, finally back in my own bed, Mom sat at the edge and told me something she'd never shared. Last year, she had tried to get Miss Winter removed after making another diabetic student wait 20 minutes to check their blood sugar during a test. 3 other parents had filed complaints too, but because Miss Winter was technically a student teacher, the union claimed she was still learning protocols and shielded her. This time, though, things were different. We had witnesses, medical charts, photographs, proof that she had nearly killed me. The next morning, while I was eating breakfast, Trevor messaged me privately. He said his dad, who'd lived with type 1 diabetes for 30 years, wanted to write a statement about how dangerous situations like mine really were. Trevor apologized for the times he'd been cruel before. He said he couldn't stop picturing my blue lips, replaying how he tried to help, but Miss Winter wouldn't let him. I stared at his words for 5 minutes, not knowing how to respond. But then Ashley jumped into the class chat, accusing me of staging everything just to get Miss Winter in trouble. She pointed out how I had to leave state testing the semester before when my blood sugar dropped, saying I was creating a pattern. She claimed her mom knew someone on the school board who swore Miss Winter was a brilliant teacher who had never hurt a student. My hands shook with rage, but I stayed calm, snapping pictures of every word she typed. That same evening, the security guard found me on Instagram and sent me a private message. He said he was sorry for walking away. He admitted he knew it was wrong but couldn't risk losing his job. He had 3 kids and rent to pay. He begged me not to file a complaint or he'd lose everything. His words made me feel sick, but I screenshotted that too and dropped it into my evidence folder. 2 days later, I had to return to the school for a meeting with the nurse about updating my care plan. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She kept apologizing, even though she hadn't been there when it happened. She promised she'd write down everything about the 4th floor being a cell service dead zone, how that made medical emergencies far more dangerous for students like me.
Something about Miss Winter's over-the-top reaction during my medical emergency didn't sit right. It felt like there was more to it than just her obsession with order. The way she dragged up how my mom had once tried to get her fired and then called us pathetic, lying manipulators made it clear this wasn't just about a classroom disruption. It was personal. After the incident, she claimed she'd pushed for phones in every classroom on that floor and insisted teachers needed training on how to respond to diabetic emergencies. 2 days later, the district section 504 coordinator showed up at our house with a laptop, a fat binder, and a look that said she meant business. Mom made coffee while I sat at the kitchen table picking at the bandage on my arm. The coordinator spread out paperwork and explained, step by step, how the school had violated my accommodations and how this could escalate into a federal case. Mom's pen flew across her notepad, writing down every detail while I tuned in and out of the legal language. Still, I caught enough to realize we had a serious claim. The next morning, I called the office myself, curious about this supposedly all-important state inspection that nearly cost me my life. The secretary shuffled through the schedule for 5 minutes before casually telling me it was nothing more than a routine annual visit. She even laughed when I asked if teachers had to lock down classrooms. No, she said, inspectors want things normal. Miss Winter must have made that up. That same afternoon, Lucia sent a group text for everyone to meet in the library. Jake came first, then Sarah with her nervous energy, and finally Trevor, acting detached but clearly invested. We dumped notebooks and scraps onto the table and started piecing the day together. Jake pulled out a crumpled Nature Valley wrapper he'd hidden after Miss Winter smashed it. Sarah had timestamps from when she'd been secretly checking her phone under her desk. Trevor sketched a diagram of where everyone had been sitting and who tried to help me. Lucia made a minute-by-minute timeline from my glucose monitor's first alarm to the paramedics arriving. We made photocopies of everything, 3 sets each, so no one could lose the evidence. Going back to school was brutal. Walking through the halls, kids stared like I was some freak show. Some whispered pity, others treated me like I was famous for nearly dying. Passing the Spanish classroom triggered a panic attack so bad I couldn't breathe. My hands shook, my vision blurred, and I stumbled into the nurse's office. She let me lie down and called the counselor, who said it was a normal trauma response. It didn't feel normal. She gave me breathing exercises and a pass to skip Spanish for the rest of the week. 3 days later, Mom and I sat across from the principal. He shifted uncomfortably in his big chair while we sat in the hard plastic ones. He told us Miss Winter was on paid administrative leave pending investigation. He kept repeating teachers union and lawyers, like warning us this was going to get messy. Mom leaned forward and asked point blank why this wasn't being considered attempted murder, since a teacher deliberately blocked a dying student from help. The principal went pale, stammering about proper channels and district policy. The following Monday, things got even more insane. I was summoned to the office where the assistant principal handed me a detention slip for assault. According to her, I had headbutted Miss Winter. I just stared at the paper, stunned. She lectured me about how violence is never acceptable. I called Mom in a panic and she arrived within 10 minutes. She laughed right in the assistant principal's face, saying, "Go ahead, punish a dying kid for trying to survive. Our lawyer would love that story." The assistant principal's jaw clenched, but she ripped up the slip without another word. Later that day, the nurse called me in. She had all my medical files stacked across her desk. For 2 hours, we went through every record, my diabetes diagnosis, the official notifications, the emergency action plans. Together, we built a timeline with sticky notes showing every time the school had been informed of my condition. By the end, the stack of paperwork was so thick, we had to wrap it with a rubber band.
By the time we wrapped everything up, there was enough proof that the school fully understood how to handle a diabetic crisis. The next day, between classes, a girl from the school newspaper caught me at my locker. She said she wanted to interview me about what happened because students were shaken, worried it could happen to them. She explained that the cell service dead zone on the 4th floor affected everyone, and people deserved to know the truth. Part of me wanted to stay quiet, just let the whole mess fade, but another part of me burned to let everyone know exactly what Miss Winter had done. I told her I'd think about it, and she handed me her card with her email. The following day at lunch, the security guard pulled me into an empty hallway. His eyes darted around nervously before he whispered that Miss Winter had threatened his job when he tried to help me. She'd reminded him about his recent warning for being late and told him one more strike would mean firing. I pulled out my phone and hit record as he repeated everything, his voice shaking while he described watching me collapse through the window. He admitted he'd been having nightmares about not opening the door and said he'd testify if it came to that. That Friday, the big 504 meeting finally happened. The coordinator, my mom, the principal, and 2 district lawyers all crammed into a stuffy conference room. The coordinator explained I could file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, since my disability rights were clearly violated. The process might take months, but it would trigger a federal investigation. Mom and I locked eyes across the table, both of us determined. We were going all the way, no matter how ugly it got. The very next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing during breakfast. Someone had made an Instagram account called Classroom Truth 2024. The post twisted everything. It claimed I randomly attacked Miss Winter just because she asked me to wait for the nurse. It even said I was eating candy in class and got violent when she took it away. The photo was the worst part. A blurry shot of Miss Winter's bloody nose captioned, "Student attacks teacher over snack." Comments poured in, people calling me insane, saying I should be expelled, wondering why I hadn't been arrested. My DMs filled with insults, even from students I'd never spoken to. Someone from another district said she heard I'd staged it all for attention. I reported the account, but Instagram replied it didn't break their rules. Mom helped me switch my account to private, but the screenshots were already spreading like wildfire. That afternoon, Trevor texted me. He said he went back to the Spanish classroom. The janitor hadn't emptied the trash yet, and the smashed Nature Valley bar was still there, covered in pencil shavings and paper scraps. He put on latex gloves from the science lab and sealed it in a Ziploc. His dad had taught him about preserving evidence for court. Trevor even took pictures of everything, the trash can, the timestamp on his phone, and wide shots of the classroom. It felt strange having the school bully on my side, but right now I needed every scrap of proof I could get. That same evening, someone started a shared Google Doc for witness statements. The link spread through our class group chat. Students filled it in. Some backed me up. Others tried to stay neutral. One person wrote they saw my lips turning blue. Another remembered hearing Miss Winter say no one could leave. Ashley chimed in that I always pulled stunts during important days, and this was probably another fake emergency. But then, someone dropped screenshots of the group chat during the incident. The timestamps proved students knew something serious was happening. 2:47 p.m. She looks like she's dying. 2:49 p.m. Should we call 911? 2:50 p.m. Miss Winter won't let us. The messages showed in real time how everyone watched me collapse, paralyzed in their seats. The school newspaper editor took it even further. She filed a Freedom of Information Act request the next morning for the security badge logs from that day to show when our access got cut. She also requested emails about the state inspection and classroom protocols. The administration panicked. The principal even called her parents, accusing her of disrupting the investigation. Her parents backed her, though, reminding the school that public records are in fact public. The editor went online announcing that the school had 30 days to respond, but was already trying to block her. Meanwhile, the school nurse typed up a 3-page report about the 4th floor's dead zone. She wrote that punishing a student for assault when they were literally fighting for their life was bureaucracy at Olympic-level stupidity. She joked the next step would be charging drowning victims with disturbing the peace for splashing. Her report explained the Spanish classroom was in a dead zone with no signal, a safety hazard that nearly killed me. She sent it to the school board with an urgent request for emergency signal boosters. The board secretary replied they'd review it at the monthly meeting in 3 weeks. The nurse forwarded that email to my mom, adding, 3 weeks could mean another dead student. And then, the FOI request actually paid off. The documents came through. Inside them, an email revealed something huge.
The truth came out fast. The state inspector hadn't even stepped foot in our building that day. They were over at the elementary school on the other side of town. No lockdown was ordered. No rule about sealing doors existed. Miss Winter had fabricated the entire thing. The email timestamps proved the inspector finished their review 2 hours before my medical crisis even began. We finally had proof that her story was a lie. Then, my mom's lawyer heard from the security guard. He asked to meet. When we saw him, he looked awful. Dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling as he clutched his coffee. He told us he would make a statement, but begged that we include he had tried to help in the beginning. I need this job. I've got 3 kids. I can't lose my paycheck, he kept repeating. We agreed. His testimony about Miss Winter threatening him was crucial. He wrote it all down. How she said he'd be fired if he unlocked the door, how he saw me half-conscious through the glass, and how he'd been haunted by nightmares of walking away. 2 weeks later, a letter showed up about a disciplinary hearing. They were charging me with assault for the headbutt. The letter warned I could be suspended or even expelled. My mom's lawyer called it retaliation. He documented everything, explaining that they were trying to flip the script, painting me as the aggressor instead of the victim. The hearing was scheduled for next month, and they were already lining up character witnesses against me. That's when I snapped and put my story online. I was done letting lies spread. I typed out everything that happened, attached my hospital record showing my blood sugar had crashed to 19, and even uploaded the paramedics report stating I had technically been dead for 2 minutes. The internet response was instant and massive. Some people rallied behind me, sharing their own experiences with abusive teachers. Others attacked me, accusing me of faking for attention. One woman even wrote that I belonged in jail for assault. I spent 6 hours blocking trolls, reporting threats, and watching strangers twist my story. The very next day, the 504 coordinator called an emergency meeting. She told me posting online could jeopardize the federal investigation. She pulled out examples of other cases that collapsed because of social media drama. To compromise, we agreed I would only share verified facts. No guesses about Miss Winter's intentions, no commentary on her motives. But Ashley wasted no time starting her own campaign. The morning after, she showed up at the main entrance with a clipboard, pretending to be oh so concerned. She told everyone Miss Winter was just following strict inspector rules. Students who hadn't even been in the building signed her petition. Some were her student council buddies, others just wanted to look supportive of teachers. By lunch, Trevor texted me that she'd already gathered around 30 signatures. I saw her walk into the principal's office at 2:15, grinning as she handed over the papers. When she walked out, she was smiling like she'd won. 2 days later, we had a fire drill. The alarm blared, and my entire body froze. The pitch of that sound was identical to my glucose monitor's alarm that day. My hands shook uncontrollably, my chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe right. Everyone else filed outside, but my legs gave out. I collapsed in the hall, the walls closing in on me. Kids stepped around me, heading for the exit. The nurse eventually found me curled against the lockers, hyperventilating. She called my mom, who arrived in 10 minutes, and drove me home. I shook the entire ride. That same afternoon, our lawyer phoned with big news. IT had pulled the badge access logs. The data showed Miss Winter personally disabled student entry at 2:47 p.m., nearly half an hour before the inspector even showed up at 3:15. She had locked us in deliberately. She knew exactly what she was doing. The security guard's written statement arrived the next day. He detailed her words exactly. If he opened that door, he'd be fired. She told him to think about his kids, his twin daughters in elementary school. She weaponized his family to keep him from helping me while I was on the edge of death. His testimony proved she saw my condition and still chose her evaluation over my life. By Friday, our lawyer filed the official 504 complaint. The stack of paperwork was thick as a textbook. It listed everything. How Miss Winter destroyed my glucose monitor, medical equipment, how she blocked my access to the nurse, and how she prevented other students from helping me. He also cited my mom's prior complaint from last year, showing a pattern of discrimination against students with health needs. The school had 7 days to respond. 3 days into their response window, the principal called my mom. He suggested a restorative justice meeting. Miss Winter would apologize, and we'd all just move forward. No charges. He said it would be better for everyone to heal. Mom actually laughed. She asked him if he'd settle for just an apology if someone had nearly killed his own kid. Silence stretched on the line. Then he muttered he'd need to check with the district. Mom hung up. That night I lay awake, incapable of stopping replaying everything. At this point, firing Miss Winter wasn't enough. If nothing changed, another kid could go through the same thing. Real reform was the only way to make sure it never happened again. The following morning, I told Mom we shouldn't just focus on punishment, we should push for real change. I suggested demanding new medical emergency policies, mandatory staff training on diabetes and similar conditions, and clear rules about when students can leave for help. Mom loved it. She said turning something awful into lasting safety was better than revenge. Together, we drafted a list of demands for the school board. 2 days later, a thick packet arrived from Miss Winter's union. Their lawyer claimed I could be charged with assault for the headbutt. They insisted I attacked her while she was helping me and warned that if we kept pressing the issue, they'd file charges. Our lawyer called them back within the hour. He explained that fighting back during a medical emergency wasn't assault, and threatening a student in that situation was intimidation of a witness. By the end of the day, the union backed down. They sent a short email saying the matter was under review. The next week, we sat with a civil attorney downtown. She specialized in lawsuits against teachers personally, not just schools. She told us we had several options: suing Miss Winter directly for assault, claiming false imprisonment since she locked us in, and, most strongly, filing for emotional distress damages. She explained that the potential financial hit could ruin her house, car, even retirement savings. Mom wanted to file immediately, but I asked her to wait. The school board meeting was in 2 days, and we'd been given 3 minutes to tell our story. Just 3 minutes to describe how I almost died begging for help and why the system needed to change. Mom and I rehearsed nonstop, timing ourselves with a stopwatch so we wouldn't go over. Every single word had to count. On the morning of the meeting, my phone blew up with texts from classmates. The state inspector's office had just released a public statement online. They never required classrooms to be locked during inspections. They said they were deeply concerned their name had been used to justify endangering students. Mom printed 20 copies and slid them into her folder. The next day at school, about 50 students staged a sit-in during lunch. They held signs demanding cell service on the 4th floor and clear emergency medical rules. The principal paced the hall looking overwhelmed, while teachers tried to disperse them. Security stood nearby but did nothing. Some kids got detention slips, but they stayed put. When a parent showed up with a news camera, the principal vanished into his office. Later that day, the nurse introduced a new official form for students with health conditions. It looked boring, but kids nicknamed it the survival clause because it guaranteed we could leave class during an emergency without permission. My disciplinary hearing happened 3 days later in a stale-smelling conference room. They gave me 3 days of in-school suspension for striking Miss Winter, but the decision-maker repeatedly mentioned life-threatening circumstances. Our lawyer said that was actually good. It meant they officially admitted I'd been in medical crisis. Ironically, the suspension room had better Wi-Fi than most classrooms. I kept wondering. The IT logs showed Miss Winter disabled our badge access at 2:47, yet the inspector arrived at 3:15. Did she plan this whole thing before any official even showed up? 2 weeks later came the 504 complaint hearing. 5 district officials sat behind a long table, serious and quiet. Mom had everything perfectly organized: badge logs, student witness statements, my hospital records, even security footage. Miss Winter's representative repeated that she thought she was following protocol, but the district panel didn't look convinced. The security guard testified, hands shaking, saying he saw me through the window but was warned he'd be fired if he opened the door. He admitted he thought about that moment every day. One official scribbled nonstop notes, while another just stared coldly at Miss Winter. That same night, the board held its public meeting. Ashley spoke in Miss Winter's defense, claiming she was simply maintaining order during an inspection. The board sat stone-faced, but I caught one member discreetly typing into her phone. Later, Mom said she was probably Googling what happens when blood sugar drops to 19. Ashley kept talking, but the audience started shifting uncomfortably. The next morning, the student newspaper dropped a massive investigation online. It had everything: timelines, interviews, proof the 4th floor never had cell service, evidence Miss Winter invented the lockdown excuse, and documentation of every ignored safety rule. The comment section exploded with parents demanding action. By lunch, local news reporters were outside the school. 3 days later, Miss Winter was gone from her classroom. She'd been reassigned to a district office job with no student contact, though still on payroll. Mom was angry she was being paid, but I just felt relief that she couldn't hurt anyone else. The kids who joined the sit-in still had to serve detention, but they walked around like they'd won a victory. Soon, white boxes appeared on the 4th floor walls, signal boosters. For the first time, everyone had full bars. Some kids joked I almost had to die to get Wi-Fi, though it didn't feel very funny. 2 weeks later, state education officials arrived with clipboards. They inspected classrooms, reviewed policy books, and checked 5 years' worth of emergency records. The principal began looking exhausted, his hands trembling during assemblies as he announced safety reforms. The investigators uncovered 12 violations in medical emergency handling and 7 more in staff training compliance. Emergency board meetings were held 3 nights in a row, packed with furious parents. The following Monday, the district announced mandatory medical emergency training for every employee. Over winter break, big glowing red emergency buttons appeared in every classroom and bathroom, linked directly to 911 and the office. Parents formed a Facebook group called Supporting Our Teachers, blaming us for making the school look bad and worrying about property values. They accused Mom of seeking attention. We took screenshots and sent them to our lawyer. One afternoon, the security guard stopped me at my locker.
After a long silence, he apologized for not helping that day. I told him I was sorry he'd been forced into that position. Neither of us should have had to apologize, but we both needed to. He said he was transferring to the elementary school soon. The district rewrote my 504 plan with the strongest protections ever seen. It gave me the unconditional right to leave any classroom, assembly, or situation where I felt unsafe, no questions asked. Any teacher who blocked that right would face immediate termination. Soon, other diabetic students requested the same language. Their parents cited my case, and within a month, the district approved them all. Miss Winter's union filed an appeal, claiming her contract rights had been violated. Our lawyer said that was standard, that unions fought even when the case was hopeless. He warned it could take months. Meanwhile, Mom found me a therapist specializing in medical trauma. She never forced me to talk, but when I did, she told me outright, what Miss Winter did amounted to attempted manslaughter through deliberate indifference. Hearing a medical professional say, Miss Winter almost killed you, loosened something tight inside me. She gave me tools for panic attacks triggered by beeping sounds, and strategies for handling nightmares about being locked in that classroom again. 5 months later, I could finally walk past the 4th floor without my heart racing. The sight of signal boosters on every wall and glowing red buttons by every door felt surreal. The nurse told me the district had hired 2 additional medical staff, and a new system made it impossible to override emergencies. Not for inspections, not for anything. Miss Winter was technically still employed, stuck in a basement office far from students. Termination cases dragged on, especially with unions. But she couldn't come within 500 feet of the school. Every diabetic student in our district was safer now because of what happened to me. The new rules, the emergency buttons, the training, they were all proof. Sometimes I wished for more. Prison time, real justice. But then I'd see younger kids walking the halls with their glucose monitors, confident they'd never be trapped the way I was. And, maybe, that has to be enough. Thanks for sticking with me while I share all this. Until next time, subscribe for more stories like this.